Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the New Ground Life and Leadership Podcast. It's really good to have you with us, and I'm really excited today to be joined by Steve Cornford, who is a pastor based at Burgess Hill, the King's Church in Burgess Hill, and has been in ministry as a church pastor for 21 years, serving in different churches. Steve is married to Carol, who's been married for 29 years. And after discovering that they couldn't have their own birth children, they decided to adopt, which they did 3 times together. And there's lots that we could talk about together, Steve. It's really good to have you with us. Why don't we just start with saying hello, Steve. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, hello, Jez, and thank you so much for having me. I'll try and be particularly well behaved.
That'll be a first, some would say. Now, Steve, as I mentioned, there's lots we could talk about. We could talk about adoption. You've got a remarkable healing testimony and story that we could touch on in a moment. But the kind of focus of our conversation today is going to be around the subject of pastoring people to die well, which may seem a bit of a heavy subject for some, but hopefully we're going to be able to serve those people who are interested, particularly in providing support and strength to people who are approaching death or who are suffering. And the reason we've asked you today, Steve, to come and share with us is not only are you a pastor with, as we mentioned, 21 years of experience in different contexts, and as you put in your own notes to me, regularly taking the funerals for your own members of the congregation, but also 15 years ago, you and Carol experienced the loss of one of your children, James, who died quite suddenly before his 5th birthday, which is just, it's devastating even to say out loud, to be honest, and strikes terror and fear into the hearts of most people just thinking about that. Is that an okay place for us to start to talk about that time and how you learned to process that together?
Yeah. I guess there's a curious kind of irony to that, because I expected our conversation to talk about how we help people plan to die well when they're expecting it. And my keenest experience, our most personal experience of loss, we had absolutely no expectation of, no time to prepare for it. It was, he was at school one day and I get a phone call to say he's a bit poorly, can you bring him home? And sort of 3 hospitals and 24 hours later, we are just waiting while doctors are, coming to pronounce him dead. So it was just massive shock and hugely sudden. With no opportunity. No one's expecting that. No one's expecting that of a little lad just not long before his 5th birthday at that age. So, very, very tough, isn't it? At the funeral, we looked at Psalm 90, where it says, the psalmist prays to God, will you teach me to number my days? And I think when a life is snuffed out so suddenly, there's every sense of needing God's help to understand what it was, what that life achieved, what we knew of life in that. We're left with so many questions. So I guess it's I don't necessarily join it all to that, but it certainly made me think about what it is, having known what it's like not to be able to prepare for death, to want to help other people, part of maybe processing my own grief. I had in a similar sense, I had a very close friend in church, a fellow church leader, who had 2 experiences of loss in his own family. His wife was diagnosed with a degenerative condition, and he nursed her for 5 years while she, while this condition ravaged her body and eventually killed her. And I watched him trying to process that loss in the same way some time before he'd lost his son very suddenly in a car crash, a road traffic accident. And it was very conscious. I was very conscious of the difference of seeing this godly man trying to process a loss where you had some opportunity to walk towards that, some time to say things and do things, and where there was no opportunity. There was a knock at the door and a police officer saying, you know, can I come in? I need to talk to you about yourself. All of those things, I think, made me think about, if we have a chance to prepare for death, what we are going to do with that. What does the Bible say to us? How can we help each other in our lives to think about it well and to live well in the light of that? Because we don't know. We need God's help to number our days.
And I think, if anything, you'd have hoped that the past couple of years have burst the bubble of our own immortality that people lived with, our own stability and security. We all thought this time 2 years ago, we all thought we're living in this illusion that, you know, B would follow A, you know, day would follow night. Everything was just very structured and ordered and secure and safe. That we tamed nature. That we were in control of our own destinies, captains of our own ship and souls. But we were abruptly reminded that it isn't the case. But like you alluded to there with those illustrations, that experiences. We're in danger of joining the idea that life is about just collecting the right set of experiences that are at least as good or slightly better than your peers. Get the set and make sure you put them out there for comparison. And you know, what else is there beyond that? As Christians, there's a whole lot more beyond that. We want to try and help each other keep a better perspective than that. And I value that. You know, I think you've alluded to it already. As a church pastor, I consider it a perk of my job that I get to do more funerals than most. I get to go to more. You know, I was chatting with one of our youth team just recently, and said, I wish that you could get something from a funeral and can it and just like just open it for a bunch of young people, just at a funeral of a believer who's lived well, honored God, run their race. You know, what is it about their life that we want to celebrate? It's because it's not always the stuff that we think is really important, and we start out chasing super hard. You know, nobody says at their funeral, they were so good, they always had the latest phone upgrade. Well, it may come, I just it's not happened yet. You know, no one says, I was so impressed with their phone upgrades, and they always went on such cool holidays. Or, you know, and you could add to the list. It's really instructive to recognize what a life is remembered for, and what we are, and what the sum of a life is, and the way that we know someone and value them when we have a chance to in those contexts. Yeah, again, because when the pandemic broke, there was all this conversation of, we'll never go back to a fast-paced life. We enjoy the slower pace of things. We've learned the planet's healing, but that's a lie, of course, because it seems that unless you go through trauma, you don't actually learn and integrate many of these lessons into your body, into the way that you live your life. So experiencing the sort of tragedy and trauma that you did, have you obviously you never people say you never get over grief, but you do learn to integrate it into your experience of life. How has that experience, kind of, and the experience of your friends, made a marked difference to the way that you live your life and think about your experience?
Yeah, I want to try and find the right way to think about loss and a life. I think to lose a child so young, you've got this massive sense of loss, and what did that count for, and what you're sort of grappling to do that. You know, I'm just on the cusp. I can feel myself on the cusp of a whole different conversation about coping with grief. But just we'll peer over the edge and decide whether or not we're going to pull ourselves back from that. because what people ask you about grief for a little bit, and then they often stop. So they oh, how you doing? You know, and then after a while, it seems they assume that you're kind of over it. And we live in a rapid news cycle, so you know, they may say, oh, do you think you're getting through that now? And there's something about losing a child like that. I'm not sure I want to get through it. Am I? Oh no, that's fine now. It doesn't matter. When is that going to be a thing? So what you want to do is find the right way to carry that and to hold it before God. But then you've got to find a way to live with something that you sort of don't have. You know, and find out what is the right way to remember someone. And so you're thinking about remembering, but in trying to find ways to hold it positively, to, you know, live with it constructively. You don't want to be, you know, I don't particularly want to get bitter and twisted, you know, but I want to hold that memory well in a way that's helpful. So yeah, it is about, some of it's about thinking regularly, what thing do I do that remembers that person or remembers some of that loss? There is a moment within grief when you experience sudden grief, certainly your whole world stops. And I remember people talking to me when we lost our son and said, I just find it odd because I look at other people who are just going about their stuff and think, don't they know it's happened? And there feels like a moment where you've got to decide, almost like, oh, am I just going to sort of carry on now as if this didn't happen? And I think I don't want to do that. So you get to a point where you think, well, I do need to pick up life. I do need to find ways to carry on, but what am I going to do in those moments? Do I want to pick it up all the same? Am I going to carry on in the same way? Inevitably, you want to look at your relationships differently and think, you know, because you thought they were all going to go on forever, and you think, well, maybe they don't. Well, in fact, none of them are they? So what am I going to do with those? How do I build or value people and life differently in that? So there's that sort of picking up moment. You decide how you're going to do that. Is that what you're getting at, Jez?
Yeah. You mentioned then you said that you don't want to become bitter and twisted, but I guess you experience the temptation, you peer into that void, and you know the kind of the satisfaction that you might experience from veering towards bitterness, because the people obviously become bitter because it's a form of comfort and relief. It helps them hold on to and prize something precious to them. So how did you prevent yourself becoming bitter and twisted, or how did you even, I mean, these are two big questions, I guess, but how did it change your experience of Christianity and pop Christianity, which so often sounds like God just wants you to have a healthy, happy, prosperous life, which seems so often at odds with, have you switched on the news recently? That's not reality. So I don't know, I'd love to get some of your reflections on that, and then we will come back to what we're going to talk about. This is precious. Thank you for sharing.
There is something seemingly cathartic about being a bit grumpy on stuff like that, but it's just like fake. It just so shortchanges you, to be honest. It feels like it's going to be a good thing, and it just isn't. But I had to find a way, some sort of framework for that. I'd grown up in a Christianity. I chose to be a Christian myself at a young age in single figures. Having been taken to church, I thought, yeah, this is for me. I'm not just culturally a Christian because my mum and dad do. So I'd lived in that direction from quite young. But in that in the Christianity I'd grown up in, we had a really high view of the sovereignty of God. And so God always knows what he's doing, and he's always in control. And then something like that happens, you know. Now, rightly or wrongly, I think I'd managed maybe not to feel everything I could have or should have about other people's suffering. But when it lands, you know, slap bang in the middle of your life, in the middle of your family, it's a little harder. You've got to think what you think about it. And I wasn't sure that I knew what to say to God about that kind of a loss. And there is a moment in grief where it comes down to you and God. But I feel as a pastor, I walk through some things with people in loss, particularly as they come to loss and as they mark someone's life, maybe in a funeral. But I feel so conscious there are some moments just beyond that, when there are some things you can be as a pastor to people, but there's some things that just comes eventually there. It comes down to, what are they going to do? What are they going to say to God now? You know, at some point the front door closes, because they either all go home or you really want them all to go home. And you're there and you decide whether or not you're going to talk to God about it. And I think my own journey for a bit, I thought, well, I know God knows because he's sovereign. I'm not quite sure what I can say to him about that. You know, what do I say? I'm sure he's got a purpose and a plan. He's God and he's good. So, and I recognised that for a season, maybe longer than it should have been, I had some no-go areas with God, where I thought, well, God knows what he's done, and God knows why this has happened in my life. And I'm pretty sure I wouldn't understand his explanation anyway. After all, he's sovereign. So, what's the best I could do? I could rile against God like Job, and he just asked me stuff about where I put the thunderbolts. Then what am I going to do? So I didn't know it. And the trouble is, I think your whole life is connected. So this part of my grief that I wasn't talking to God about, you know, is on the opposite end of the stick of my joy. You know, we talk about different emotions as if they are discrete entities. That's just kind of a helpful way to describe them. But I found I'm losing joy. Seriously, I just, by default, I become a grumpy Christian. Not that I didn't think I was going to become one, but I was, because I wasn't expressing grief. I was losing the ability to express joy in God too. You know, because emotions are a job lot, and if you try and stick the lid on one, you in some measure stick the lid on them all. And my best attempt to sort it out was to spend some time shuffling around the book of Psalms. I realized that the psalmist is saying some stuff to God that I didn't think you were allowed to say. There's some really grumpy ones there. And I thought I needed to understand what they were saying. And in the first instance, I thought, well, if I'm not sure if I could say it myself, I'll just say it because someone else already said it. But by looking at them and reading them and living in them, it began to give me a language to say, right, so this is what you can say when you don't quite know what to say. And a lot of Psalms get to a place of resolution in God, but there's a couple. Psalm 88 definitely doesn't. Psalm 88 ends up in the darkness, really. It's harrowing. It's kind of like, it goes, God, I don't know what you're about here, but if in case you haven't noticed, I can't worship you when I'm dead and I'm going down. You know, there's the end. You're like, oh, okay. And that, what a language that gives you to say, God, I'm in this place and I don't know quite how I get out of this. You know, similarly, I think, was it 103? In the same way, it doesn't get all that far. There's just a couple that really don't quite land. And I needed those. And I needed those because I thought, I don't know where to go with this. I don't know a way out of this. I need to know God in a place where, and to be able to say, that's kind of where I'm at. To figure out that, of course, God had found a few other stuck grumpy people before, and he let one put one of their songs in the book. You know, it was okay, but for me, that was a really important part of my journey. I didn't realize that, and I hoped I could help people with that too. So I spent a little while badgering people about the soul, which was just probably me processing. But I preached a psalm, preach on Psalm 88, and I did it a couple of places where people would let me, and I remember hearing from someone, a friend of mine said in the church, she said, I don't know if you know this, but I've given one of your talks to some friends of mine. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm thinking of, I don't know about you, Jez, but I don't expect people to be passing my sermons around. I'm glad if they sit and listen to the end of them. But anyway, she said, yeah, that they're friends of mine and they've lost a son. And their son's passed away. And he's married and has children, and they obviously want to see their grandchildren. But every time they see their grandchildren, they can see their boy, their own son, as he was growing up, and it's so painful. And so I gave them this CD, and I just wanted you to know that every time they drive down to visit their grandchildren, they play your preach on Psalm 88 in the car on the way down. And you're like, wow, what a thing that, you know, we can try and help each other walk through some of that kind of grief, really. And for me, I find that helps me make some sense of it. I think, what did my own lad's life didn't quite make it to 5 years, but actually his life spoke to me, and then my life spoke to these people. I haven't even met them, but I sense some of their pain, and I hope in God I can encourage them to keep bringing it to God and find a voice to God in all of that grief. I hope just find some way to keep looking to him. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
It's precious. Thank you so much. And you know, it is also, you remind me of just the privilege and pleasure it is to be a pastor of people. You know, obviously us as church pastors, but anyone involved in pastoral ministry around people in the realities of life, it's just such a privilege. And you know, to any people out there who are discouraged, finding life hard as a pastor, not experiencing much of the joys and success, it's just that reminder, this is a precious privilege that the Lord's given people. And yeah, and to hear people responding to your benefiting, if you like, or being comforted by your own grief. And actually, even in the question I asked about, you know, how do you process that in light of a Christianity that seems so light and sugary and talks so much about the joys and pleasures of life? Well, yeah, I'm just reminded as you're answering, we're not responsible for Christianity so much as the Christianity that we put out, and actually the Christianity of our culture is probably a product of our own comfort as a society anyway, and our own prosperity. We create a society and a Christianity that emphasizes comfort because we're living in a comfortable society. So actually when pastors and people put out a different form of an authenticity that looks like what you're describing, it does something to undo some of the easy believism perhaps that people might associate with some parts of the church.
Yeah. I'm wary of a triumphalism. We have a lot to celebrate in our faith because Jesus has overcome, and there's just this extraordinary victory that he has in the cross. I don't want us to pull any punches or step back from that. But we live in the valley sometimes too. And for me as a shepherd, a pastor, it is a shepherding role. I want to know what it is to walk with people through the valley too, try and help them. So to find a language in that, find ways to share that, give them some framework for it, even as I'm trying to figure out my own. I feel a bit daunted by the subject, to be honest. It's, what I had to learn some things about grief when I went through loss. But since then, I've just been learning that everybody else processes grief in different ways anyway. And I need to try and, support them as they are processing grief too. So just how that is and help them find God in that too.
Yeah. Wow. Well, in our conversations over email, you drew up for us really helpfully a list of what you think it means to help people not just die well, but actually to live well, in integrating all of life into our experience of Christians, so that things like this don't become they're always going to be sudden and shocking, but they don't become something that we don't expect as Christians, or that completely blindsides us. And I want to come on to talk about that list. Before I kind of go through that list, can I just ask you one more question about what we're talking about? I know that it's a question that people have asked you, and often it's one of the first things that particularly my non-believing friends will say when they hear of a Christian suffering. They'll want to ask the question, did it make you doubt God's existence? Or you might say in a secular society like this, it's never been easier to throw out belief in God when life throws you what it's done in your circumstance. So how do you process that question and that reality?
I don't mind admitting I have doubted my faith, and I do. I think doubt is a place where faith grows. So the points, in the same way that if you think you know something, you're never going to learn anything. And parents might be able to relate to this. If you're parenting and you're wanting to explain to your children that a kettle is hot, and they're like, no, I know, Daddy. Like, okay, there's something here you don't actually know. But because when they're convinced they do know, they're never going to learn. And I think when I'm most convinced that I know everything about God and suffering, I'm not going to learn anything. I think it's in the place where I don't know what I know that I'm most able to discover or to encounter God and to hear him speak to me. So I think I don't want people to be frightened of their doubts, or like, oh, I can't possibly admit to no, I'm a really good Christian, I do believe it all, I believe it all. I don't know if that's going to help. I think it's okay to say, quite, that's really hard. It is hard when you face loss like that. That's really hard. That's when you need God the most. And to think you've got it all buttoned up, you're not going to help yourself or anybody else. You know, I think if I met someone who said, yeah, I've got it all sorted like that, my fakeometer would be like, I'd be like, sort of, yeah, this smells a bit fake to me. I'm not sure if I get it. So I think it's okay.
So maybe a related question. Why didn't you throw out belief in God in light of this tragedy?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. I think what I did know, it's a curious thing, but I'm there. We're in the hospital, and we are waiting. There's a point somewhere in the middle of it all happening, and as it would happen, my friend and colleague Jim was in London on another reason that day. I had no idea, but he was able to come and called by the hospital in a way. I don't know how else he would have got there as quickly without that. But we're there in the hospital, and we are just trying to relay to him this crazy everything that's happened. And I just knew, I remember saying, God hasn't changed in all of this. For all of it, I felt I'd just known God in a way before that I thought I don't know how to make sense of everything that's happening. At that point, we didn't know whether or not our son would live. It was possible that he could live and have a very, very different life. We were still waiting. We just had no idea, which way was up and how that was going to work out. What I did know, even in the middle of that storm, was God is still there, and God is still God. And I remember talking to him saying, I just know God hasn't changed by this. And I was absolutely sure of it. I guess by God's help and by his grace, I knew that. God knew I was going to be in that place. And in his kindness, I guess he made sure I got clear on that before I got to that place. Yeah, what I did need to work out beyond that was like, okay, God's definitely still God. He hasn't changed. But I think there's some things in God that I thought were true, or I said were true, and I just needed to work out what I did actually believe. And I'd sort of make a comparison to like rock climbing, which is a dangerous thing because I've never done it and I don't actually know very much about it. Okay, but I think if you're trying to scale a rock face, there's moments you get to a certain point, and in some kind of climbing you put pins in or some things that you and it felt like I was still on the mountain, but I'd lost my grip, and so I was probably swinging on a rope somewhere, and I needed to get back holding onto the mountain. And I just felt there was a time where I knew I was hanging on by the things I absolutely knew about God. And then I needed to okay, and there's some other stuff that I told people and I wanted to sound convincing in, and I probably needed to pick those things over. Do I definitely know God's like that? Yeah, okay. No, he is actually. No, that's true. And some other things like, well, okay, God, maybe we need to talk about that. How do I know you in those sorts of things? So yeah, it's a journey of sort of re-engaging in those things. It's easy to think that God loves people more that really nice stuff happens to you. I've thought that. Am I allowed to say that? Well, I just did. It's easy to think that, isn't it? Sort of that God loves successful people or something. You got to work all of that through. Yeah. Or does God love people whose children don't die, or or that whatever. You fill in the blank for your own life, the thing that you thought your life was going to be, and it hasn't. You've got to, there's things to bring to God and work out with him in that way. But then you bring them to God, and so when I get round to saying, God, do you know what it's like to have a son die? You just feel oh yeah, of course, no, why did I say that? And in ways, as you begin to talk to God about it, you just recognize, of course God knows, I just felt God was so gracious. He didn't, for all the things that I found hard, I don't think he ever forced me to have one of those conversations. He, somebody wrote a book pointing out how gentle and lowly he is, which is probably worth a read, isn't it? But there were just moments, but there were moments when he said, I just found him saying, if you ever want to talk about that, you can come and talk to me about that. Just felt God's patience and his grace in waiting and wanting me to speak to him about it in things. Just amazing. So in my own life, I'm trying to articulate. It sounds a bit cliche to say that, be brave and in doubt, faith can grow in doubt. I mean, that's sort of Christian poster material with a nice picture on the back of it, isn't it? But what I'm trying to say is that I really felt like that happened in areas where I thought, okay, God, how do I know your love like somebody else? How do I know what you know about my own life or experience? And just God's graciousness in holding that and giving me the time to work out that he wasn't at all surprised by my anger or my pain, and he wasn't upset about it. He wasn't going to get in a huff. That it was a safe place to come to him with all of that. And as he restores faith in you, you bring that to him. So
that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, wow. Well, let's come on to talk then on the other side of your experience then, and what you'd now say to people in helping them to live well. I'll read out these 7 points and then we'll walk through them, if that's okay. So number 1, all of life is dying to things. Number 2, death is not normal. Number 3, death is a unique opportunity to love, lead, and encourage others. Number 4, regret proofing. Number 5, lamenting. Number 6, letting go. And number 7, finishing well. Let's start with number 1 then. All of life is dying to things. Talk to us about that.
Well, actually, I borrowed that phrase. I heard Liz Holden say that even quite recently. She went on to suggest, give examples. Getting married is dying to yourself. And having children definitely is. Having children will root out every ounce of selfishness in you. And you then decide, as a parent, whether you're ready to die to yourself in order to love your children and work those things out. So I think it's helpful to recognize that dying isn't just something that we don't talk about, and it is going to happen. And then, just at a moment, just before it happens, ideally, maybe a week or so maximum, we might think about that. I think if we live a life that recognizes our choice the opportunity to die to things. When we come to a physical death, we've kind of practiced. We've done the exercise, as it were, and it's just more of the same. But it does, I suppose, knock out any ideas of comfortable Christianity. There is just a readiness. Jesus, he said, "Take up your cross and follow me." That wasn't about self-flagellation, because the cross wasn't about suffering. The cross was about dying. So you're choosing, and if you die to yourself, you're probably not going to suffer, are you? Actually, because dead people don't suffer quite the same. But, I think it's good for us to have an awareness of that, and so I pose the question to myself, even in the songs that I would encourage us to sing, or the prayers that I want to pray. Am I talking like God sorts everything out for us in that kind of way, in a not dying to yourself kind of way? Or, how does that affect the way that I live, as if things matter or they don't matter? How do I keep my priorities in a heavenward kind of way? I want to live well in the moment, but that's because I'm living with a future perspective on that moment. I'm thinking about what it stacks up to, where that really goes. So I want us to find ways to wonder in God and enjoy him in that way that will help us in the moment, in what we understand and what we don't understand, so that we don't have to think, well, I've got to understand that, I can't live like that. Well, that's an important part. There's that sense of transience in our worship, really key. That leaves us thinking about being with him, and that day, every day in the light of that day. That's dying in all of life, isn't it, to me? Because I think if we are more ready to die, we're going to be more ready to live. Absolutely, for sure. I think so. People like C.S. Lewis said that those who made the most difference in this world. Everybody quotes C.S. Lewis, don't they, without checking whether it's quite right. I'm just about to do the same myself. Doesn't he say, if you read history, you'll find that those who thought the most of the next life did the most in this, something like that. Go and check the quote, but it's a good one, and it's meaning the same sort of thing, isn't it? Yeah. And I think some people speak about that and the importance of thinking about how we're going to die. I think there's a similar quote from Augustine I came across recently. Treat your soul as if you'll die tomorrow, and your body as if you'll live forever. But I think in our world, maybe we need to treat our soul as if we're going to die today, because we kind of, the old manana thing, we put it all off till tomorrow anyway. But I think we need to recognize some of the imminence that leaves us ready to live in a way that's ready to die. Because I think what if, I ask the question, we lived a bit more ready to die? Would that leave us more ready to live? If we were just more aware of our own mortality? Really, that's really key to me. I think, I made the comment, I think it might leave us a bit less anxious about aging, or even appearing to age. Why do we need to look younger? Why is that even a thing? I mean, it's not the most important thing, but people can worry about that, can't they? Well, it doesn't, you look like you're getting older. Is it actually a reminder? Well, yeah, I'm getting older, and whenever that day is, however God's numbered it, it's probably a bit closer today than it was yesterday or last week, and my hair definitely says so, or my wrinkly face says so, whatever else it does. It doesn't matter. I've got to fight it in quite that way.
That's great. That's really helpful. Yeah, all of life is dying to things. Okay, number 2, death is not normal. Talk to us about that.
I think it's a thing that's worth recognizing, because sometimes I hear people in an attempt to cope with death to sort of normalize it. Well, it's okay. Part of life is dying. You know, you're born, you live, you die. There's a natural cycle of all these things that, but actually, if we've simply got to accept death as something that's coming to all of us, there's nothing else more certain in life except for death and taxes, or whatever we might say, then what is there to pass to people? Well, we just, it's normal. You're going to die, get over it. Which let's just be clear, is completely unpastoral. Okay, I don't want that to be taken out of context or misunderstood. Death is not even slightly normal. Death is, one of the things that is still wrong with the world, and will be until Jesus comes again. And so, Jesus looked at death. He stands at the tomb of his friend Lazarus and weeps in the face of death. Now, I don't know, the theologians have tried to think about exactly what he was feeling in that moment, because we're just told he wept. Was he sad? There's some sense with the use of language. He was sort of, there was, maybe he raged at the grave in that moment. There's a real strength to the feeling that he has. I think that's, the language certainly gives us some sense of that. But again, I've already said emotions are not a job lot, so I think it's possible to be angry and sad at the same time. Maybe he was both. Okay, but what it is, there's something wrong with this grave that his friend Lazarus was in. So Jesus wept, because death has been caused by sin, and sin is a problem in our world that we need to look to Jesus for, committing him to ourselves in death, just as he committed himself in death to the Father. It's absolutely vital in that. There's, as we stand with those who are facing death, as we pray about it, it's not, oh, just help us to recognize and accept what's kind of coming. It's like, Lord, this was never your purpose in creation. Part of our prayer is, come, Lord Jesus, and put an end to this corruption in the world, this tear, this distortion in creation. And come, Lord Jesus, and make all things new. And so Paul writes to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 15:26 that death is our last enemy. And so I think, as we think about death, we want to look to our Redeemer for anything good that he might bring, even out of death. It's not just, it's a bit, which is quite different than, that's a bit inconvenient, it's kind of coming, this is awkward, we didn't want that, we didn't want it now, in fact we didn't want it any sort of time, but hey, get over it, it's kind of, no, it isn't, it's okay. That's why we grieve in death. The Bible says, we grieve, but we don't grieve as others, we grieve as those with hope. But it doesn't say, oh, we don't grieve because that doesn't matter, and well, we're going to be with Jesus anyway. And in some way, I think, even in pastoring people to die well, I think there's a moment where we need to help them to say it's okay to grieve. What happens when a believer, has lived well, run a great race, has gone to glory, is with Jesus? Oh, that's okay. They're with Jesus now. That is great. They are with Jesus now. But your marriage of 50 plus years has just finished. Your life partner who spurred you on, it's gone. Now there's grief, isn't there? Because we're made for relationship. It's how we know the truth and spur each other in the truth. And death, what's wrong with death is it, albeit temporarily, severs relationship. It tears us apart. I grieve because I've lost someone. I'm not going to see them anymore. I'm not going to be able to hear how they're feeling. I'm not going to be able to tell them how I'm feeling. I'm not going to know their encouragement or comfort. They're not going to know mine. That hurts. And so we do grieve. And death is not normal. God didn't make us for relationships that will be ripped apart. He made us for eternal relationships in him. And so death is not normal. I think as we pastor people to it, we recognize that loss of relationship, that loss of connection. And we point people, it reminds us that, all of our relationships are finite except for in Jesus. And it turns us back to him in that. But it's something to recognize in that. So we want to help people in all of that to keep hoping in God, even in their grief.
That's really helpful. And actually, in a culture that would want to normalize death and say, everyone dies, it's okay, you have to accept it. Actually, that devalues the significance of the one we've lost in the bereaved eyes. So actually, for the Christian to be able to say this is not normal, it's okay to feel very angry and feel the full force of God's anger at death here. That's really helpful. Number 3 then. So death is a unique opportunity to love, lead, and encourage others.
Okay, I think I love this. I think that what is so important is that part of living well and living every day as if we're going to die is about saying, well, you're going to make sure you say that stuff. If today's your last day, you don't just catch up with someone and go through the sports banter, as good as that is. What is that thing that you really wish you'd say, or that you would really wish you would say if you knew it was that last conversation? What's the unspoken stuff, the undone stuff? Well, if I knew I wasn't going to see them again, I would have helped them with that, or I would have gone to see this person. I would have, expressed this, tried to put that right. Wanted to deal with those kind of things, and that's why we want to live all of life like that. And so, if you are in the, I might call it the privileged position of knowing that you're going to die, there is an opportunity to love, lead, and encourage others. I would ask myself the question, what would I prioritize if I knew I was going to die? Who would I say, well, I really need to see them? There was some, stuff down the road. We didn't deal with it as well as we should. And we need to, be great to have some closure in that now. What would I make sure that I said? What would I want my children to hear me say as many times as I could before I died, that I don't always make the effort to say now? It's living like that. How could I lead people in that kind of way? I'm so struck by that. I think of my friend who had those 5 years I mentioned earlier with his wife. Actually, of course he felt loss. Of course he grieved after his wife had passed away. But my observation was that he held that grief so differently than he did for his son, because in 5 years there were a lot of important conversations. She led him and he led her. There were things they were able to say and be. There were moments between themselves, moments with their wider family, things that could have been said and were better said than not were said, which is so important. What an opportunity there is to encourage others. And we see, which is, maybe that's a bit countercultural. If you knew you're going to die, we just want to talk about a bucket list, don't we? What's on the list? What experiences do I need? But I think as believers, if we knew we're going to die, and hey, we all do know we are going to die. What is it that I can give to others? What would be on my, bucket list for doing and being to other people? Knowing, in ways that I could encourage them. Really key.
That's a beautiful idea. I love how you flip that. Thank you. Yeah. Well, talk to us about number 4, regret proofing.
Yeah. Now, in some ways, I think that's probably just sort of the other idea turned around. Having talked about the unique opportunity to do things positive. One of the ways that I want to live well is to think, well, even just to scan my own life and think, yeah, if I didn't do that, how bad am I going to feel about that? So, because I'm not always good at thinking about the best ways of doing things. But if I can just sort of sweep up around the edges and think, yeah, I'm going to feel pretty awkward if I don't know, then I am regret proofing my life and thinking, okay, I don't want to live with that being a regret, therefore I will. So it's, it just helps me when maybe I'm not as motivated by my love as I need to be. I'll take it. I'll take the motivation from a little bit of regret avoidance.
That's great. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't matter what the motive is. Sometimes the action is important enough that you should do it regardless of what your motive is.
Yeah. And then you do it and realize what a difference it makes. And that's a great place to know love. You discover it, don't you? You can grow in that sort of thing too. So
excellent. Which is a form of self-sacrifice, isn't it? That number 1, dying to things. Dying to what you'd like to do is not do this, but I will regret it if I don't, so I will. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, we're on number 5. Talk to us about lamenting then. It's obviously been a big part of how you describe going through the Psalms and your experience of that.
Yeah. Other people have talked about it better than me. There's some good books out there about it, so I'm sure you can find yourself something on it. But I think I wouldn't want us to discount lament as a kind of resignation or passivity, a kind of stoicism that's just like, well, we'll just be here in our grief and just look at life and say, oh dear, as if what a sadness, as if it's just some kind of whimsy, or for pessimists, yes, I might be one, but and optimists are never going to do that. Oh, please don't ask me to lament, anything like that. But I just think that there is some real value in that. I think we live in a society that doesn't really know how to express grief. And so it tips into anger too quickly. And you see people just look for places to land their anger because they haven't taken their grief to God. And I wonder if there was some place, I think, in recent days we remembered Desmond Tutu. He gave a place for people to lament and express grief under the horrors of apartheid. And in doing so, I think he helped a nation to process some of the grief of a dreadful chapter in its history, in ways that I think the world saw. I'm not sure if the world learnt from. I think some people looked and, oh, well, they didn't do anything. They just went and, what did it achieve? Well, what it achieved was people's sorrow was heard, their lament. And I think there was some healing in that. I think I wouldn't underestimate what it achieved in that way. But as somebody else wrote this, and I think it's a good way to put it, I like this definition of lament. It's choosing to feel how God feels, because the world is not how it's supposed to be. And so if there's something about lament that we could do and is worthwhile doing, it's saying, how does God feel about this broken world? How does God feel about death? How does he feel about dementia or cancer? How does he feel about mental illness in its, in many and difficult forms, physical disability. How does he feel about suffering as we see it in so many dreadful ways in the world around us? And being okay to ask God how he feels about it, to not to think, oh well, he's okay, he's always in a good mood, it's all right, as if we've got to sort of jolly ourselves in some way. I think God is good, and he is gracious and loving, and his love reaches out, and it reaches out to things where he sees pain and hurting too. And if I'm going to reach out like him, maybe I need to look where he's looking. Maybe I need to ask him what he's feeling, and have some sense of that. I think we need to find a way to handle lament in a way that impacts us, that motivates us to be more like God. I give the example, I think we do read Ecclesiastes, but we only read it quite occasionally and sentimentally. When we read the bit, there's a time to be born and a time to die, but I think what that is saying is actually the seeming hopelessness of those things. When we feel out of control of a time to be born and time to die, we read it as, oh, that's okay then. That's all right, there is one. I just didn't know it. Oh, good. Well, God knows. No. I think what the writer in Ecclesiastes is saying, there are all those things, and yet I feel sort of powerless before God. And I know there's a time to be born and a time to die, but God, wanting to come to God in all of that and see his order and something of what he senses in all of life as it begins and ends. In a way that helps us to feel like God does.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And you mentioned about how does God feel about things. It occurs to me, it's in the book of Genesis, we get an insight when it talks about the Lord being grieved and regretting that he had ever made man, when he sees what mankind has done. We might be able to relate to that when we look at how humanity has destroyed the earth in so many ways. God's grief, this was not how you were supposed to behave and treat my earth. That's beautiful. Lament, very helpful. Okay, number 6 then. Talk to us about letting go and how to integrate that into a life of living well.
Yep. I think very much of Psalm 90. I think it's verse 12 that talks about teaching us to number our days. I stumbled upon that when my son died, and I've tried to live that as I live with the loss, that personal loss. I want God to teach me his wisdom and something of his order, that he's in control, that I can trust him in all of that. It's hard when we are trying to pastor people to die well. One of the things that it's easiest to pray is that they won't die. Please don't let this happen now. I didn't want this. I think there's a place in pastoring people to die well that hopes to lead them to trust God enough that maybe this might be God's number of their days. And I recognize in many ways that can feel harder than trusting God for a miracle. God, I know you could heal them. Please raise them up now. Surely we all want to pray that first. But I think if we're going to pastor people to die well, sometimes there's a moment to say, what if this is God's day? Do we trust God in all of that? And as I'm pastoring people, I may meet with them when they've had a difficult diagnosis from a doctor, They've been to see the oncologist. They've heard some news. The doctor's given them a day, some time. And what will they do in all of that? And interestingly, I would say, in my limited experience as a pastor, that quite often the individual themselves has the clearest sense of their time. That I will meet with a believer, and I want to hear what they are praying. Sometimes when we pray, we hear, I hear they've had a diagnosis, something's happened, they're not well. Oh Lord, don't let it happen, Lord, stop it now. Sometimes I visit them and I want to know I want to pray with them. I want to hear how they're going to pray. Maybe they're more ready. Actually, Steve, I think I'm ready to go home now. And to know God, I've lived for this day. I think it might be soon. So I want to find out where they are, how they're praying in their season of life. And it may be, as a pastor, that it's likely that will shape the way that I will pray with them and pray for them. Because I think in pastoring people to die well, one of our main roles is helping people to recognize where God is in their circumstances. I find Paul Tripp, I've read as much of Paul Tripp as I can. He's a great writer for pastors. And he reminds me that pastorally, most of what we're trying to do when we visit people, whether they are well, whether they think they're dying or not, is to recognize God in their circumstances. Because they want to see the pastor, because this has happened in their relationship, this has happened to their teenage children, this has happened when they went to the doctors, and they're confused. They weren't expecting it to happen, and they thought God didn't do that sort of stuff. And so they're asking you as the pastor to say where God is in all of that. So, and sometimes you think and then other times you haven't got a clue. But we want to trust God, and even when we're not sure, isn't it? That's a place to grow in Him and find faith in Him. So I want to help people find God in their circumstances, even when that circumstance seems like, I think I'm going to die, and maybe this is the moment. So that's really, I want to help them to let go. Sometimes that means that I'm actually trying to pastor the family of someone when I'm trying to pastor someone to die well, because the person themselves is getting ready to go, but their family aren't quite ready for them to go. And I've known times where it seems like, even though I believe that God numbers our days, and I feel like I see that, it seems like they're almost hanging on till their family let them go. And there's a moment, maybe it's in God's numbering, where we're together and we're able to recognize, this might be the time. And as family, seemingly give that person permission to go. And soon they do. There seems to be something in that. That's, I don't know, what doctors or medics or anyone else might say that, but as a pastor, that seems to be an experience in terms of people knowing and the importance of letting go. It could help someone when you love someone to be able to do that. Encourage them in their way. It means that you're more likely to have the conversations, to be able to lead each other to even in all of that. Although if you aren't ready to let them go, you're not going to have the conversations that you might need to have, because I don't need to have them. You're going to get better. It's all right. There's some moment in this actually. No, maybe this is the time, and let's talk like it is anyway. And hey, if you get better from that, we had some good talks.
That's a great bit of wisdom.
Wow. In all of that. Yeah. But and I need to say, in all of that, obviously, sometimes we need to know letting go from after a sudden loss too, because there's whilst sometimes it seems like we recognize God's timing, I'm not sure this side of heaven that I will ever be an expert in God's timing. There's always a sense of mystery in that too. So we pastor people with an expectation to recognize God and a humility that he's God and he numbers our days.
Excellent. It strikes me as you were talking as well, there's this need to help people let go of their grip on this life to take hold of what God's got for them on the other side of what they had. And that is, sometimes it's like trying to prise a child's fingers off something they're clinging on to desperately, not letting go of. But that's really helpful. And then we come to number 7, in helping people to live well. It's the idea of finishing well. Talk to us about that.
Yep, I think what I think in terms of finishing well is that from our culture, we're going to champion, we're going to prize personal experience. And if we don't check that in our own lives as believers, we will want even death to be a good experience, or at least difficult as it possibly can be, rather than actually being about finishing well. So I think pastoring people to finish well will lead us instead to value perseverance and faithfulness through sickness and in death. When I was younger, I don't know about you, I didn't think that much about dying. But if I thought about it, I kind of thought it would probably be best if I slipped away while I was asleep. That would be good, wouldn't it? Never know anything about it. But I've lived long enough to know that that is really hard for people who are left behind. To know that is a sudden and a devastating loss. I've lost a friend in that way myself now, and it makes me recognise that how foolish my youthful ideas of dying were, because we just want to avoid any sense of difficulty in that. In the same way that as we wouldn't want to live like Christians where we avoid any sense of effort. We come on, we're called to follow Jesus, to give everything for him. And I think there's that same expectation in finishing as there is in living. And that is wanting to say, we don't champion faithfulness enough in living. I think if we did more, we would be ready to recognize it in dying too. I think, Jesus prayed in John 17, wasn't it? He prayed for our protection. And I was looking at that recently, and I don't know why I'd never really thought about it before, but it's a kind of curious thing, because he prayed for his disciples to be protected. And if history tells us anything, I think all of the 12 of them came to a difficult end. So I'm like, oh, hold on a minute. What happened to that prayer for protection? Because their finish was kind of awkward. John might have lived to old age, but for the rest of them, it seems, as best we know, they were martyred. What did you or did you not, Jesus, pray for their protection? Well, he did. But what he prayed for was that their faith would be protected in that they would be faithful to the end, that they would persevere in the gospel, in the love and the grace that he'd given them. And I think we miss some of that. I think we're skewed to a present physical experience view of life and even of death. That actually there's a finishing well that is faithful, that maybe if we have an expectation of that, even in some difficulty at the end of life, there's a way that we can keep looking to Jesus and encourage each other to do that. That's hard. If you are pastoring a family who are seeing a loved one sick, and are saying, why aren't they with Jesus yet? You know, their quality of life seems to have ebbed completely away. How do we, you know, maybe their ability to communicate with their family is minimal at this point. But if we cherish finishing well, we're going to want to make everything of that moment. Everything that moment. I've just walked through the end of a life of somebody in our church. We had a Thanksgiving just a couple of days ago, and an individual had a diagnosis of cancer with just a few days or a few weeks to live. And in the early stages of there weren't many stages in a few weeks, but in my first visits to visit this fabulous, faithful believer, from her bed receiving palliative care, she sung to me, and she just sung, "Trust in the Lord and wait patiently for him." This beautiful piece of Mendelssohn that she'd probably sung many times in her life, as she was in that moment, knowing that her ability to do anything for God was going to be massively limited in the days ahead of her. And it was a huge privilege to gather with her family and to sit at her bedside when she had little or no speech, and to sing back to her and to pray for her, you know, in those days, in those final days of her life. It was awesome. It wasn't, you know, we might have an idea of what awesome worship is and think of a huge congregation in a big arena somewhere with an amazing band, but to be at her bedside, worshiping together with her family, just looking forward to heaven, that was awesome worship. It was absolutely awesome. It was amazing, and I think that's part of finishing well. We want to encourage each other in, for all the pain of that, for all that was so hard to see in health that ravaged her and finished her life in that way. You know, if she hadn't, you know, if days had been shortened, we wouldn't have worship with her in that way. And I, for one, am so grateful for that. I quite think her family would be too.
Wow. Thank you. Those are 7 things on how we can help pastor people to die well by helping them to live well. Number 1, to impress upon them that all of life is dying to things. Number 2, to allow them to live in the reality that death is not normal. Number 3, to remind them that death is also a unique opportunity to love, lead, and encourage others. Number 4, to help them to consider regret proofing their life and experiences. And number 5, to allow them to lament, to plumb the depths of lamenting well. Number 6, help them to let go, learning to let go. And number 7, learning to finish well. Steve, those 7 things are deeply helpful, very practical, and no doubt will just be equipping a lot of pastors and leaders now as they hear those things, and particularly just to hear your tenderness of heart and your shepherding heart for people. It's a real privilege to talk with you and an inspiration. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for asking, Jess. It's great.
Well, Steve, our time together is up. I feel like we must come back, and there's so many more things we could talk about. We'll have to record another one in a few months' time, perhaps on. I'd love to share your story as well of healing that you experienced several years ago now. Is there anything you'd like to say as we close? Anything's on your mind that you feel like you haven't said, or you'd like to restate?
No, I'm sure if people are listening this far, thank you very much for listening this far and for hearing me out. I will. I think it's worth mentioning a couple of books that I read recently, which I think helped me in that. John Wyatt's book, Dying Well, I think is a good book for pastors who are wanting to help people think through, even trying to support a family, trying to make difficult decisions about end of life care and what some of the issues are. And also I read this book by Michael Whitmer, The Last Enemy, Preparing to Win the Fight of Your Life. This is the kind of book I think you could share with somebody in your church who's wanting to think about that. Maybe they are just freshly aware of their mortality and thinking, hold on a minute, this is a new chapter and I want to live it as well as all the other chapters. So some that I think would help you and some that I think might help those you pastor. And if you read them, you might recognize some of the things I've shared today.
We will put the links to where people can buy them in the description to today's episode as well. So anyone listening can go on our website, newgroundchurches.org/podcast, and you'll find a description, a link to those books there. Steve, thank you so much. It is, I know I keep saying it, but it's a real privilege to talk with you, a real treat. It's been, really sacred time as well in many of the things that you've shared, particularly about your personal experiences. Thank you for sharing them with us.